Hello and welcome to the GetU2TheTOP Podcast. I am your host, Warren Macdougall. Thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate your time. I know that you have other choices out there, and I'm really happy that you're spending time with me and my guests here on these Vernon location-specific podcasts that I'm running presently. Today's guest has lived in Vernon for 13 years. And her goal is to convince Vernonites that it's never too late to become healthy and active. She's originally from Quebec, and there aren't many things that she hasn't done. And she says that she's a late bloomer in life, and it took her a while to find her niche. So Marie-Cat Bruno, who runs the downtown Soulmate, it's for your feet. It's SOLE, just in case you were wondering. She started her life in Montreal. She worked on a degree in physiotherapy from McGill there, and then she was all set to start a biomedical engineering master's degree when she got offered a lecturing job in a rehab program, and she didn't pass that up. So at the age of 25, she was the youngest professor on staff there. She taught for a few years while working part-time in sports physiotherapy until she moved to Whistler. And she thought that the commute to Vancouver was a little bit too long, so she gave up her teaching position and started to write instead. So she wrote for a few different magazines, and we touch upon that in this podcast. And she was also working part-time in a ski shop. And there's a funny little anecdote that comes up in this podcast that I was quite surprised about, so listen in for that. She started making some custom footbeds and she was also working in the physio clinic there, and it became clear to her that her favorite job was making the custom footbeds. So she went back to school to do a diploma in pedorthics, and she was still racing almost full-time cross country while she was living in Whistler, and realized that wasn't the best place for racing or training. So she'd been looking at Vernon and Silver Star for a few years, and she finally, in 2004, made the commitment to come here because her dad said sometimes in life you have to gamble. So she sold her practice in Whistler and moved to Vernon. And this conversation runs a little bit longer. It's a lot of fun. I really enjoy it. Marie-Cat is quite an interesting person and wonderful. She's very, very giving. I like what she says here. One of my favorite sayings for her was about a volunteer organization. When you need someone to do something, you look around the room and ask the busiest person, and they will find a way to get it done. And in Marie-Cat's example, they were right. Also, there's another story that's kind of funny. That one of her roommates told her that if she had 30 minutes, she says, I can probably get a 45-minute run in. So she's quite busy with all of her different things that she has going on. She's a volunteer firefighter up at Silver Star. She also spends a lot of time instructing in different options with telemark skiing and cross-country skiing. She is actually the only female instructor in North America to have achieved the highest level of certification in both cross-country and telemark skiing. So I hope that you'll enjoy the time that I spent with Marie-Cat Bruno. Thank you for joining me, and enjoy this podcast. Thank you for coming, Marie-Cat. It's great to see you. I really appreciate you coming. So I like to start off my podcast with a 90-second brag. So can you tell us a little bit of what's going on great in your life right now? It doesn't have to be 90 seconds. It can be as long or as short as you like.
Well, actually, you know what, Warren? Today is just an absolutely gorgeous day. We live in such a beautiful place. And I think I'm just grateful that I'm able to appreciate that. You know, a lot of people drive around, walk about, and don't even notice the beauty around them. And I think that's my gift, is to be able to see it and appreciate it.
Nice. Do you have a practice that you utilize, like meditation that you are grateful or anything like that?
I don't meditate. I've tried. It's just not for me. Well, in the proper sense of sitting down and doing a meditation session. I find running for me running in nature, so trail running mostly, is a great way for me to meditate. But mostly in my daily life is I like to say what I'm grateful for before I fall asleep every night.
That is great, because a friend of ours does a mindfulness training, and one of the things that she likes to tell people is to use cues in order to be grateful for things. So I find that in the mornings, and I've said this before on a different podcast, but I'll walk the dog and I'll see things, and I'll say to myself, see, feel, or hear, so that I'm listening for things. If I hear something crackle, I'll say hear. If I see something like a tree branch that's swaying in the wind, I'll say see. If I feel something like if something comes to me that I can feel it on my hand or on my foot, that I'll say feel. So for me, it's a mindfulness, but it sounds to me like it's something similar to you where you're doing it in nature. It sounds like I love running for a long time, and I find that I get into a flow state where I don't even think about what's going on, and it's just the wonder and beauty that surrounds me.
Yeah, I think the fact that it's so repetitive and it's almost like a transcendental type meditation.
Yeah.
And that works for me.
Cool.
That's what I love.
Do you get that when you're cross-country skiing too?
Not as much.
No?
Not as much.
Huh.
Yeah, I like the peacefulness, going cross-country skiing on days where it's snowing. There's nobody on the trails.
Yeah.
And,
you can see the snow in front. Yeah.
Exactly. The sound of silence, I call it. Yeah. It muffles the sounds when it's snowing. I absolutely love it, but it is not the same effect as running.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool. So I think people can tell that by your accent that you're not from Vernon. Can you give us a little bit of insight as to where you were born and how you ended up here in Vernon?
Absolutely. Well, I was born in Montreal. I guess you can tell by putting the emphasis on the wrong syllable once in a while. And I pretty much grew up on skis. I grew up in the country, and from a young age.
Where did you ski there?
In the Laurentians. So I was born in Montreal, but no, even further up north, Saint-Donat.
Okay.
Is actually where I'm originally from. Grew up in Saint-Donat, and what was amazing about it is you pretty much put your skis on right at home.
Oh, really?
To go either cross-country skiing, or once I got into downhill skiing, I would actually cross-country ski over to the downhill resort where I had a locker, change gear, downhill ski, and then sometimes my parents would pick me up at the end of the day, or I could ski back home.
Wow.
And it was the same on our bikes. There were no mountain bikes back then, but we just rode normal bikes on trails. So I've been blessed with a childhood where playing in the forest was what we did. So I got used to that. I had to move down to Montreal for university. So I did my years downtown Montreal, and I could not wait to move back to the country, which I did. And then eventually I ended up in Whistler, being the skier that I am. And
so just before we get to Whistler, what university did you go to in
I went to McGill,
okay.
So that was another one of my brilliant ideas. I grew up, of course, speaking French. My mom is French-Canadian, my dad's Italian, so we spoke French at home. And
do you know any Italian too?
I do.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm not very good at it, but I can survive.
Okay.
Yeah, so I grew up in a French community, of course, but by the time I was in high school and I started working, I worked in the mall, and a lot of the kids who worked in that mall came from an English-speaking school that was nearby. And those kids spoke perfectly French, English, switched back and forth, no accent, and...
Like Justin Trudeau.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that became a goal of mine, a dream. I wanted to be perfectly fluent. And there's a law in Quebec that if your parents went to school in French, you have to go to school in French. Yeah,
I didn't know that.
It's a provincial law. It may have changed by now, but back then we didn't have a choice. We had to go to school in French until you get to Cégep, which is the equivalent of college here. And then you can choose. But the only English-speaking Cégep was too far, when the one I could go to was like a 15-minute walk. So I did my Cégep in French. So when it became time to go to university, I thought, if I go to university in English, I will be forced to learn. Well, little did I know how difficult it would be to not just do the physio program, but do it in English. So the first semester was quite a challenge. Things as simple as...
Did you take any English classes to learn English as like a second language?
No. Well, we did back then. There was no immersion.
Okay.
So you started English in grade 4.
Yeah.
And that was 2 hours a week. And I had 2 hours a week of English from grade 4 to what for us is secondary 5, which is grade 10.
Yeah.
And then that's it. So that was my background in English. But of course, being in Montreal, and I have relatives in the US, I mean, I probably had it was maybe a step ahead from the other kids, but still not that much. So when I went to university, simple things like an assignment. Well, in school, you learn about homework, but not assignment. So I would not even know we had an assignment because I didn't understand the word assignment. So I'd come back the next week and everybody was like, oh, how did you find the assignment? The what? The assignment. What's that? Well, you have to hand in a paper today. What? So I had horrible grades.
Yeah.
So coming from being a straight A student to suddenly barely passing classes, that was really difficult.
Yeah.
I started recording the lessons, the lectures. I mean, come home with the recorder and my whole family would sit around, the dining room table and listen to it. And sometimes I would replay it 5-6 times and I'd be like, do you guys get that? No, play it again. Do you think, what is he saying? I don't know. And it was very, very difficult, very challenging. But at McGill, it's interesting because Quebec is bilingual. You do have the option to be able to hand in your papers in French if you choose to.
Okay.
And you can write your exams in French.
Oh, wow.
But my goal was to learn English.
Right.
So I only hung out with the people who spoke English because there were a few other French-speaking students in the classroom. I avoided them because I knew it would be way too easy to speak French with them and do everything in French. So I avoided them, hung out with the English-speaking ones, and did all of my papers, everything in English. Did all my internships, rotations in English. And then by the time I was done, I was pretty good.
Yeah. So then you graduated and you went to Whistler directly?
No. So after university, I worked in Quebec for a few years. I was always fascinated by braces and orthotics and had decided to go back to school and do a master's in biomedical engineering. I was just really fascinated by body mechanics, and physio was not enough for me. Physio was too much of repetition and almost like sometimes memorizing recipes. And I wanted to diagnose. I wanted to play with the mechanics. And so I was on the edge. I'd found someone to do my master's with when I got an offer to teach at the School of Orthotics and Prosthetics.
Where was that?
That was in Laval. That was a college program, the Cégep. And I thought, well, that sounds kind of cool. So I decided to jump on that. I'd always been a natural teacher. So I jumped on it and did that for quite a few years. Really enjoyed it. Learned more about orthotics and even learned about fabricating them, and more and more I was thinking, this is what I'd like to do, but I already had a university degree, so it made no sense to me to go back to college, because in Quebec, you do university after Cégep, so to go back to Cégep didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Back then, I was already involved with cross-country skiing, but also the sport of orienteering, where you run in the forest with a map and a compass. And the big countries back then, and still are, were all the Scandinavian countries. And I'd been also dreaming, because now I was fluent, French, English. My next goal was to speak Swedish. Don't ask.
Who was the guy?
It was not even a guy. It was just because in those two sports, especially the orienteering, we're constantly surrounded by Scandinavians.
Right.
And then I started meeting Canadians who had gone to university in Scandinavia who were now fluent in Swedish. So I wanted to be fluent in Swedish. I wanted to be like them too. Wow. I had a thing for languages, apparently.
Yeah.
So while I was teaching, I'd started applying for jobs in Sweden and trying to find a way to go spend at least 6 months in Sweden. And I was on the edge of working out. I had received a work visa. I was going to go work in Sweden for a year. And I sold pretty much everything I had. I was about 3 weeks away from moving, and the work visa fell through.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and that was a devastating time. I didn't know what to do. And at the time, my best friend from university had been working in Whistler. And she said, you know, every time you come visit, you don't want to leave. You love it here. So she said, you've taken a leave of absence from your job. You don't have a place to live anymore. You sold everything. The only thing you have left is your car and the boxes you were going to take with you to Sweden. Put them in your car and move across the country. And I thought, you know, how often in your life do you have the opportunity to make a radical change like that? So I thought, okay, I'm going to Whistler for a year, which I did. And then, of course, being in the mountains and being surrounded by all these outdoorsy people, and it was wonderful. So 1 year led to another, and then another, and another, and 5 years later, I'm still in Whistler, and but
what were you doing there when you first arrived? Were you doing anything in the field of?
Yeah, so I went back to being a physio because for me to teach, which was I absolutely loved teaching, I would have had to commute down to Vancouver.
Okay.
And that was a bit too much from Whistler, especially back then. The highway wasn't what it is now. It was even a longer commute. And so I went back to being a physio. I started writing articles, like health-related articles about injuries, because that was, I guess, a different way for me to teach, but still a way to teach and share my knowledge.
So where were you getting those posted, or where were they being
They were published in... There was a North American orienteering magazine that took them. There was a European cross-country running magazine who took them. And then once in a while, some random Runner's World would pick up one of my articles. Yeah.
Oh, cool. So you were doing it basically freelance writing for different places. That's
pretty
cool.
much,
okay.
Yeah, just for the love of sharing my knowledge, really. So I did that while I was working as a physio, but I was also working in a ski shop because I needed something to feed my crazy
adrenaline.
Yeah, and the amount of skis I needed, and boots and bikes and. You know, so working in a sports store was fun too, and I actually enjoyed it more, sadly enough, than my physio job.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
which shop did you work at?
I was working at Wild Willie's.
No way.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. Okay.
Why is that?
Because Lucy, do you know Lucy Vernon?
Yes, she's the reason I started working at Wild Willie's. Do we have another connection we didn't know about?
Lucy and I dated for 4 years.
Oh my goodness, that is too funny.
Is it 4 years?
Bobin.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. She was my parents' neighbor's niece.
Yeah.
So that's how I got connected to her. And
Okay, so Lucy lived in Banff when I lived in Banff. And we dated we dated for quite a while, and
too funny.
So that is very funny.
It is. So Wild Willie's it was.
That's cool.
And I really loved working there because what I mainly did, because of my background, typically in those types of retail stores, the women sold the clothes and the guys sold the equipment. But I didn't want to sell clothes. I wanted to be with the guys selling boots and skis and being a boot fitter, which is what I did. And amazingly enough, in that store, we made custom footbeds, which suddenly brought me back to my love of orthotics and medical devices. So I absolutely loved that job, but of course it wasn't paying enough. So working as a physio part-time was what paid the bills. Right. And then I went and played at Wild Willie's and had fun hanging out with the skiers. Yeah. And it was actually to the point where I would joke and I would be at the physio clinic and say, look at my watch. Oh, I got to go to my real job now. And, leave the clinic to go work at Wild Willie's because I enjoyed it more.
Cool.
Yeah.
So you worked there for 5 years, and what made you leave there?
Well, there was always the cross-country ski racing that was still there for me. And living in Whistler was not the best place.
For cross-country?
For cross-country skiing.
The trails there, they're not fantastic for that.
No, and that was before Callahan.
Yeah,
so,
right.
So the only trails were at the village elevation, which typically gets rain in the winter.
Yeah.
So the season was very short, often raining. Now, coming from Quebec, you don't ski when it rains, like it's blue sky and cold. So I had to learn to train on my skis in the rain, which already was very difficult. But then the races were all far away.
Mm-hmm.
The races were typically at least a 4-hour drive. So it wasn't ideal. So in my quest for continuing my training and my racing, I ended up at Silver Star fairly often. And every time I'd come to just the interior, I would leave Whistler, and the minute I would arrive in Lillooet, where all of a sudden it becomes more semi-desert, it opens up, I would just feel this relief. It felt so good. And then I'd come to the Okanagan and it felt like home. And I would come training at Silver Star early season, and then I'd go back to Whistler and I'd have to wait another month before I could be on the snow sometimes, right?
Wow.
So it was difficult, and I was still at the time trying to be a high-level athlete, and I had to drive to go skiing, which was horrible, having been used to ski right out of the house. Even though it was just a 10-minute drive, it changes everything. So the whole time I'm in Whistler, I'm still dreaming of Silver Star. And every time I come to Silver Star, or at least the whole Okanagan, I'm like, I think I'd like to live here. But by then, I'm a little bit established in Whistler. I've got my clientele as a physio, and I've started making custom orthotics, because that's another funny story. But I did start making custom orthotics while I was at the ski shop.
Okay.
Because coming from the East, our orthotics were flexible. And hard plastic orthotics, now I might get shot by other pedorthists in the West now saying that, but for me, hard plastic orthotics was like going back in time, 20 years back in time.
Okay.
So, but I didn't know that's what's made in the West. Right. So my first client in the physio clinic who has knee pain, I looked at her alignment and I said, you'd really benefit from orthotics. And she says, well, I have them. Oh, well, let me see them. So she pulls them out of her shoes, and I look at them, and they're these like hard plastic thingies. So I go, oh, well, no wonder these don't work, because in my mind, I'm thinking, you've had those for 20 years, right?
Right.
So she gives me a strange look, and I say, well, those are really old. And she says, no, I got them about 6 months ago. And so now I'm really puzzled. So I turn around and I look at the physio next to me, and I take the orthotic in my hand and I go, what's wrong with these? And she looks at me and she goes, well, I don't know, Mary Cat, you tell me. So I knock on them again and what's wrong with these? And she's giving me a look like, Mary Cat, I really don't know what's going on with you. And I said, well, these are hard plastic. And she's like, uh-huh. And your point is? And I'm like, really? Like, knock on the orthotic again. I'm like, really? And she goes, Mary Cat, I really don't know what your point is. I'm like, these are hard plastic. And nobody understood what my problem was.
Yeah.
So I said to this lady, I said, I work at Wild Willie's at 5. Come see me there. So the lady comes, and I take the same material that we made our custom footbeds for ski boots with, and I make her a pair of orthotics out of that. And I said, try these. Well, she was in heaven. She loved it, right?
Cool.
So, yeah. So then I thought, well, I've got all the equipment here. We make custom footbeds. Why wouldn't I make orthotics out of the same material? Because it's brilliant. It's flexible. It works. So then I started buying the same equipment and making orthotics out of my garage. Well, it wasn't my garage. It was my roommate's garage in Whistler.
Cool.
So by the time I've been there for 5 years, I do have, a bit of a clientele established for orthotics and a little bit of physio. And so moving was going to mean starting from scratch again. So that was a bit scary. But I really...
Any drawback to Sweden at all at that point? Like, so we skipped, like, did anything happen there with
It did, actually. The visa finally came through. But I remember I was driving with my dad. My dad decided to jump in the car with me and drive across with me.
To Whistler?
Yeah.
Okay.
Partly, I think, because my mom was really concerned about me driving across the country solo. But I think it was a little bit of one of his dreams to do that. Mm-hmm. So it just worked perfectly. And we drove together. And once I crossed the middle point, which I can't remember, it might have been in Dakota or something, I told my dad, I'd said, if by then the visa has not come through, mm-hmm. I will carry on and I'm not looking back. But if the visa comes before I've reached the midpoint, I'm turning around.
Okay.
And he was cool with that. And we crossed the middle and the visa hadn't arrived. And being the stubborn girl that I am, I stuck to my guns. I was in Whistler when the visa did arrive and the job was there. And I said, no.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah, it was difficult because that was another dream, but being in the mountains was also a dream of mine. Yeah. So it was working.
So the 5 years and you've got your clientele and you've got your footbed, your orthotics that you're creating out of your garage.
Yeah.
And then you've been to the Okanagan a number of times and you love it here.
Absolutely.
So what was the key factor that tipped the edge to make you move to Vernon?
I think it was a discussion with my dad, telling him about how much I loved it here and what was stopping me from moving was the fear of, maybe not being able to make it financially, starting a new clientele in a town where I knew nobody. Moving to Whistler was easy. I knew someone. Mm-hmm. I was coming to Vernon totally not knowing anyone here or just, acquaintances mainly. So my dad said, well, sometimes in life you got to gamble. And it was almost feeling that I had his support. And maybe that's all I needed, is to have his support to make the move.
Cool.
And I did. And I researched the Okanagan, to be honest. Like, even though Silver Star was my first choice, I thought I'd make an educated decision and research the entire Okanagan. Mm-hmm. So looking at Nickel Plate, which is the cross-country area by Apex. Sure. I looked at Big White. I looked at Salmon Arm because Large Hills is another great cross-country ski area. I looked at Kamloops. And Vernon was the only place where I could live on the trails, so not have to drive to go skiing, and still work in Vernon.
Right.
And I thought, okay, well, this has to be the place. And so I moved to Vernon, and
so you just picked up everything and left Whistler.
I did.
And moved.
I did.
Wow.
Yeah, left all of my clients, which some of them were very disappointed that I was leaving, especially the physio ones, because orthotics, once you have made orthotics for someone, you can make them another pair without necessarily seeing them, you know, and you can work by mail. It was more the physio clients that I was leaving behind, that you can't do physio from a distance. Right. So some people were really disappointed, but Vernon was calling me.
And when you moved out here, how soon did you set up your shop?
So, well, the first challenge was finding a place to live.
Okay.
At the time, I already knew I wanted to live at Silver Star, but it was proving to be a little more difficult than I thought it would be, finding something year-round. And I was starting to look down, thinking maybe I wouldn't have a choice. And then, boom, that place came available. So I moved to Silver Star. And
is this the same house you're living in now?
It was up until just a year ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I lived in that same place for 12 years.
Wow.
Yeah. So my mom came and helped me move. So lots of trips, you know, between Whistler and Vernon. So that would have taken about a month to get settled. And then I started looking for a location for my business. Okay. Which I found right downtown. And again, you know, at the time, I'm like, what have I done? Was that a big mistake? You know, suddenly I wasn't making orthotics out of my house anymore. I was going to have a overhead, which was a bit scary. But I'm right across the street from Fisher's Hardware. And one day I was in, everybody said, oh my God, Fisher's Hardware, you got to go there. You see, it's a really special store. And someone had said, yeah, you go there twice, they'll know your name. I was like, oh, come on, right? Well, it was true. I'd gone there like once or twice. They already knew my name. And one day Larry Fisher wasn't super busy. He's at the till. And I said, oh, how's business? And I said, well, you know, takes a bit of time to start. And so he pulled out a piece of paper and he started writing down names of doctors, massage therapists, like people he knew in town in the medical field. And he gives me that. He goes, go see them. Tell them Larry Fisher sent you. And I was stunned. And in that very moment, I knew I'd made the right decision.
Cool.
I just knew.
So he gave you the names and you actually followed up and were able to...
I actually didn't.
You didn't?
If he's listening, he's going to kill me. I was way too shy to do that.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so I didn't. No, I didn't call a single one of those people. But, the gesture was appreciated, even though I didn't follow through.
But you've created your own clientele.
I created my own. There was actually Kevin Mitchell, who works for the Morning Star, had interviewed me for an orienteering result. I won the BC Champs or something like that. So I made contact with him and I was telling him I'm starting a new business. And he said, well, when you do, give me a call and maybe we can write something in the paper about you, which they did. And then from that article, people started phoning. I remember the hospital called me and said, would you come and give us an in-service? Sure. And I went and, told them about what I did, and they started sending me patients, and it was just word of mouth. I advertised once in the Morning Star, and at the time it was published 3 times a week.
Right.
That was it.
Wow.
Everything else, word of mouth, and the clientele slowly started building up.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was fabulous.
So at what point, I remember, I will have mentioned this in the preamble before, but I met you for the first time at the FTC, the Fire Training Center, when we were both doing our course for the firefighting.
Yeah.
And you're a firefighter up at Silver Star, right?
I am indeed.
And you're a lieutenant, is that correct?
Yeah.
And you've been there for, is it 7 or 8 years now?
I think I'm going on 8.
Yeah. Okay. So, because we did our same training, I think it was 2010 in October and September, October that year is when we were up there together.
I thought maybe it was 2009, but something like that. It's been quite a few years, 7 or 8 years.
So what made you choose
probably
to do that? Was that just something you wanted to give back to the community, or?
Yeah, so that was the year that I went into my faux retirement. So I'd remember I was a cross-country ski racer.
Right.
And I'd set some pretty, high-level goals for myself. I wanted to crack the top 20 in the world. And by 2009, which were the last World Championships I believe I went to, which were in Japan, I didn't achieve that. I think I came 23rd, 24th, did not crack the top 20.
Still pretty amazing.
Well, it was, but there were lots of factors that made those championships not be the best races for me. Mm-hmm. So it's hard when you could have done better. Like you really want to know when you have a good day, not even your best day, but when you have a good day, where you stand. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have that feeling in Japan, but by then I was pretty burnt out from training. I'd been training and racing without even taking a year off since probably 95. So it was a lot of years of racing and not taking a break, which is not the smartest thing. But
which discipline did you race? Was it mainly?
Both orienteering, and then by then I was into ski orienteering.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so ski orienteering was where I figured I had my best shot at cracking the top 20 in the world. So it didn't happen in Japan, and I decided to retire.
Okay.
So when I retired, all of a sudden, you can imagine the amount of extra time I've got on my hands. You know, when you train 15, 20 hours a week on top of your job, all of a sudden you've got all this free time. So I thought, well, I'm going to give back to the community. I've been here for a few years and I want to get involved. And I was going to become a coach. I was thinking, I'll just coach cross-country skiing, coach the kids. And at the same time, I don't know if it was because I had friends in the fire hall and they said, you should come check it out. And I was like, oh my God, like I don't even like light a match. I'm scared of fire and I don't really like heights. I don't think this is for me, but at the same time, I like a good challenge. So I thought, okay. And so I went to the fire hall and went to practice for a few weeks. And all of a sudden, they had this open spot on the recruit course. I didn't really have time to think about whether I wanted to become a firefighter or not. I got offered a spot in recruit and I jumped on it without thinking too much. So I became a firefighter and became used to working with fire. As a matter of fact, I now work at the training center and I'm paid to light fires. I mean, who wouldn't love that?
Yeah.
So it's been really cool, really challenging. But what happened is when in that year, I'm now retired from racing, so I'm not training. I'm giving my time now to the fire hall, and all of a sudden they announced World Cups in Lake Tahoe. That would be 1 year from now, back then.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, my God, I've raced there tons. It would feel like home, because I'd never, in all of my races, I'd never done any World Cups or World Champs in North America. It'd always been either in Europe, Australia, Japan. Nothing in North America.
Wow.
And all of a sudden it's going to be in a place where I can drive, get there with my own car. I can bring everything I want for waxing and all my comfort elements on trails that I feel like I know, in venues that I know. So I thought, this could be my chance. I'm coming out of retirement. So, oh goodness. So I did that. I called my coach and I said, guess what? I'm coming out of retirement. And he happily jumped back on board. And now I'm juggling my job, the fire hall, because once I'm committed, I don't let people down. And now I'm back to training.
Wow.
Which was a bit much. Very close to a burnout, but I managed to keep training to the end, and I think by then my approach had changed, and all I wanted, it wasn't so much cracking the top 20 in the world anymore, it was to have a good race, to be happy with my race no matter where I placed. And the first race was long distance, which wasn't my best shot, because I was better at slightly shorter. But that first race, boom, 19th.
Wow. So when you say long distance, what's that distance?
So in ski orienteering, it's really hard to tell the distance because it will vary on how much elevation. They aim at a winning time instead of having a set distance like a marathon. So the winning time for the long distance is 90 minutes for the winner. So if you're not the top in the world, you're probably going to be 100, 110 minutes typically. And that was a bit longer than, I have a bit of short attention span. So those races tend to be a bit long for me. I kind of get bored and I want it to be over.
Right.
But I hung in there and crossed the line in 19th.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So all of a sudden the pressure is off.
Yeah.
I've met my lifelong goal and now I'm only there to enjoy the races, and they just got better from there.
Wow.
Yeah. So I was able to happily retire after that. Retired for good. For good. You won't even catch me in a local race. I don't even want to hurt anymore. If I'm going to hurt when I bike, it's on my own terms, and it's because I choose to in that very moment, and I can stop anytime I want. So
when we take a look at the fact that you're also a telemark skier, as well as the cross-country skier. So do you still coach or teach people how to do it?
Yeah, so somewhere in the middle of that, I figured I didn't have enough on my hands. So I decided to start getting certified in instructing.
Right.
Yeah. So
for telemark or for
both,
for Nordic?
because one wouldn't be enough.
Right.
So well, actually, not true. It was mainly cross country at first, and by the time I got to wanting to do my level 4 cross country instructor, you had to be able to do telemark turns on your cross country skis, and I'd never done a telemark turn in my life. So somebody suggested it's probably easier to learn on the proper gear and then transfer it to cross-country gear. So I thought, okay, brilliant. So I signed up for telemark lessons and had a major crush on the instructor, which probably helped, but fell in love with the sport.
Nice.
And then next thing I know, I'm using, of course, my new acquired skills to pass my level 4 cross country, but now I'm like, well, maybe I should do my level 1 telemark, right? Why not? So I started teaching telemark as well.
Wow.
And then by the time I reached my level 4 cross country, I had actually done my level 1 telemark already, and then got into becoming a course conductor, so teaching people how to teach and now giving those levels.
Pedagogy.
Pedagogy, yeah. So I started climbing that ladder as well, and I actually climbed the telemark ladder as well, and became the first and still only female North American having the highest level in cross country and telemark.
That's amazing. Wow. So
life is not boring with me.
No, no, we can say that for sure. So that's incredible. And at what point did you decide to start driving Volvos? Was that when was that the Sweeting thing, or is that because of firefighting, or is it?
That's another thing we have in common, the Volvo. Well, I don't know why, and maybe it is because it's Swedish. I've always driven wagons. My dad had a Subaru Loyal, actually a GL back then, the very first one, and then a Loyal. Then I bought a Loyal. And I always really liked the look of the Volvos, but they were just too expensive for me. So I stayed in the Subaru family for years until one day, that might have been a mistake, but I started looking at used Volvos. It was time for me to retire my Subaru, and there was one at the dealer in Kelowna that, was reasonably priced. So I went to look at it, and then the salesperson, very clever guy, said, you can take it home if you want. And I said, really? He goes, yeah, take it home, show it to your partner and take it back on Monday. And I'm like, really? I'd never heard of doing something. I was sure, I'll take it. Well, by the time I get home, of course, it's gotten dark, and driving up Silver Star Road, it's really twisty. Well, those headlights, they turn when you turn the wheel.
That's great.
Oh my goodness, I'm driving up Silver Star Road, and I'm fascinated by the headlights, and I was not even halfway up the hill. I knew I had to have the scar. So he was a really clever salesperson. Once I drove it up Silver Star Road, there was no giving it back.
No, that's for sure. They are great cars.
Yeah. Still drive it, still love it.
Yeah. Okay, so my company is called Get You to the Top. So I try to help people get to their top. So what is it that you're doing? I think we've touched on so many different things that you do and have done to help people get to their top. But let's see, your shop, the Podorthist shop, you're building the orthotics, so you're helping people get to their top by building things from the ground up. You're giving them a foundation, eh? So what can you give us a little insight onto what somebody would do if they wanted to come in and find out whether or not they need the orthotics in the first place?
Absolutely. The easiest thing to do is to find us online.
Okay.
At thesoulmate.com.
That's spelled S-O-L-E?
Yes, it is. We're not a dating agency, so it is S-O-L-E, thesoulmate.com. And we have this really nifty app on it that you can book an appointment online. So you can just click on that, look at the schedule, whatever works for you schedule, and then you come in and see us, and we'll spend 45 minutes to an hour with you, looking at your alignment, how your body moves, your strength, your flexibility, how the joints move, and we'll watch you walk on the treadmill, run if you're a runner, bring in your ski boots if you're a skier. And based on that, we decide if there's anything we can do to help you either keep your body aligned or make your body stronger.
Just make it better.
Yeah.
Cool. So that's awesome. So thesoulmate.com.
Correct.
Okay. And one last question. I think we've gone kind of long here. I'm sorry about that. Hopefully you have time for this. But what is it that you would say to somebody who's never been to Vernon that you particularly love about Vernon?
Oh my goodness. There's so many things. But I think it boils down to one major one for me, and it's the energy of the community. It's just beautiful.
Nice.
Yeah, that's what it is for me, the energy.
Cool.
Yeah, people are good and people want to help. It's like the biggest village in the world, like that village atmosphere, but it's built into a city. It's amazing.
I just got goosebumps. I feel the same way. That's great. All right. Well, thank you, MCAT, for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And if people want to find you, it's thesoulmate.com.
Correct.
And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.